Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. We don't have enough resources for cybersecurity or for IT in general. We keep hearing that. But is it really true? Recently, a major CISO in the US published an article that said, this is ridiculous. We have more than enough resources. We just have to stop asking for 10 years experience or advanced degrees for entry-level jobs. And it's not the first time I've heard comments similar to that. Others have argued there are lots of people out there if we just looked for them. The cure for the resource shortage for those people is to expand diversity programs, increase the availability of training. And I've been a big supporter of this, and I have had high hopes. There's some great programs out there. But despite that, the results of a recent survey from the Canadian Cybersecurity Association, their Cyber Cities report, we did an interview 2 weeks ago, and the report floored me. Apparently, despite all our efforts, these diverse communities, the people in them, don't feel like they're being supported, reached, opportunities. Are we ever going to fix this problem? It's not for the want of people who are working on it. There are lots of great people, and my guest today knows something about this topic, and he's promised to give me a no-holds-barred interview to talk about his unique experience in providing support and training and what we can do better. Pablo Listingart is the founder and executive director of ComIT, a Canadian not-for-profit organization that offers free technology and professional skills training to unemployed and underemployed Canadians. And Pablo has his own ideas about how companies might bridge the gap. And he's got the experience to back it up. Welcome, Pablo.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for having me to have this conversation.
Yeah. Now, before we get going on this conversation, I want to talk about how you got here. You have a fantastic story. You started, where were you? Where did you originally come from?
I'm originally from Argentina. I came here to Canada almost 10 years ago with my wife and my son. After we arrived, we had another daughter here who was born here in the prairies. And my story began many years ago. I used to work for a few corporations like Microsoft and IBM and smaller and medium-sized companies. I've been working in the tech industry for over 20 years. And what happened was that at one point, I wanted to give back to the society, to the global society in general, by doing something that was meaningful to me. Not that it's not meaningful to, for example, donate funding to charities or to do specific work, but my idea of doing something for the problem that you were mentioning was to actually try to train people for free so that they could get jobs. So basically, I started back in Argentina doing lots of different things, from going to the parks and delivering flyers with my wife so that people could find out that we were providing these free courses, to trying to find a lab or a place where people could get computers to practice, all those kind of things. So it was very grassroots thing. And I kept doing it for several years, just dedicating my time to train people, to help them get jobs, to connect them with companies. And that became one charity in South America, another charity here in Canada, and it keeps growing. So it's been quite a ride.
So what's the Canadian connection? Now, Argentina, I've had friends from there, quite a warmer country, I think, than where you ended up in Winnipeg. What brought you from Argentina to here?
Sometimes you grow up in a place where you don't feel that comfortable, that you don't feel that your values and principles sometimes align with the things that are happening, right? Argentina is a very uncertain country where everything changes all the time. So we are very used to live constantly surviving, right? And at one point that wears you out. So with my wife, we started researching the world because we just wanted to find a place where we could feel comfortable, that we could feel that we can be ourselves. And so we went to Europe, we went to the US, And my wife had a cousin in BC, and she told us, "Have you thought about Canada?" And to be honest, it wasn't radar, as you said. It's the two ends of the American continent. But you don't come to think about Canada, and everyone, of course, over there thinks that we live in igloos, or whether here in Canada it's super cold. And yeah, I live in Winterpeg, so it's close.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And you took this idea of train with you to Winnipeg. And how did you start up? You arrive in a new country. You obviously speak English. Your English was good when you got here, so you didn't have that one strike that many immigrants have, and that is that struggling with the language. So you obviously had the command of the language, but you end up in Winnipeg with this idea of doing training. Is that what happened?
yeah, yeah. What happened wasn't quite that. What happened was that, as I mentioned, I was still working on the charity back in South America, and I was doing with other people all these things for free and with our own money from our own pocket. And then after 4 or 5 years, one day I got a phone call from someone that I used to work with at the co-working space. And he said, "Hey, I'm calling you from Google." And that was weird. You don't know if it's a prank call or something.
Yeah.
And he was like, "I've been following your work for the last couple of years, and I would like to support you to do more." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Okay, whatever. This is a prank call, definitely." And I was like, "Yeah, go ahead and present our project." So he presented that. And so when I left, by the time that I left Argentina, we actually got that first grant from Google.org. And so the charity back there started to grow. When I arrived here, I was still working as a freelance developer with my wife, who is a freelance designer. We were doing jobs for local businesses. We were trying to do our stuff while I became the virtual executive director for the charity back in South America, which I'm still at. I still am. And it wasn't in my radar to do anything like that here when I arrived, because when you arrive as a newcomer, even though I didn't have to take care of my English, I had to take care of finding a place to live, where my kid was going to go to
Yeah.
school or daycare. It's a mess moving from one country to another. But after a year and a half, my wife, who is the smart one in my family, she said, "Hey, that's great what you're doing in South America, but why don't you do the same here? Why don't you give back to the country that took us in? Why don't you do something to improve the situation here?" And so we went to the company's office, we incorporated the nonprofit, and the rest is history.
Wow. And what you obviously did this because you felt, I don't know if it's you could do it better, but you had a vision of this which was different than what was out there. What was your vision?
My vision has always been to include those who are being left out. In Argentina, I had the luck to go to a public university. That means that you don't pay any fees to attend to
Yep.
college, right? But still, you have to pay for your books, you have to pay for meals, you have to pay for the bus. So there are still people who are left out. And when I arrived here and I started finding out how much colleges and universities and boot camps and everything related to education cost, I was like, for sure, there are many people who are having a tough time pursuing the Canadian dream. And for me, that's a crime almost, right? Because there are so many talented people. We are bringing people from all over the world who arrive here with PhDs and masters, and they are doing survival jobs, working at Walmart or Tim Hortons or whatever. And you talk to them and they say, "I have a PhD in physics." I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah. The porting of qualifications into Canada, that we call it Canadian experience, because programming is so much different in Argentina or anywhere else in the world, right? COBOL but is spoken with an accent somewhere. This is not.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand why some qualifications might need to be updated, law, things
Yep.
like that, where you have a different, but technology, I'm having problems
Well,
with that one.
I'm having problems with that one as well. I always tell people, when many immigrants arrive here, or they come on an exploratory visit, as they call it, or whenever I work with people from remote communities that are not on the mainstream job, they are not part of the urban cities work, employment or whatever, then I talk to them and they ask me for my expertise. They want to know how I did it. And I always tell them that it's hard for me to tell them what to do or not to do because I hate the immigrant booklet, as I call it, right? Like when I arrived here, I met some people and they were all like saying, you have to do this. You have to get Canadian experience. You have to volunteer. You have to go through any type of education and get the Canadian certification. You have to, and I did the complete opposite. My path was completely different because what I did was to try to play to my strengths, right? I was like, I know what I can do. I know what I can learn. I know that I can find my own way without listening to everyone else because every single person has their own experience, their whole background, lies, family support, everything, right? Instead of doing what others did, why not do it your own way? And that was my way of overcoming that prejudice that you are mentioning, right? Like just pushing through it.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully it's a lot less these days. The other thing that you brought up, and I think this is we talk about barriers. One of the barriers that you've called it the immigrant booklet, and I think that's true, is everybody's got their own formula for what you should be doing. Matter
Yep.
of fact, that's one of the biggest problems I have when people do outreach. Any community that is left out is that we try to project ourselves onto them. And not overstating my role in this, but I've done some work in bringing in refugees and everybody looks at them saying, they have problems in their family. They have issues. I'm going, yeah, just like everybody else in Canada. What did you think? They're perfect little people we pluck out of there, and we, the great white hope, are going to bestow them with our wonder? This is nonsense. They're real people, real issues, real struggles. And do you find that gets in the way of many programs? I think it does, but that might just be me.
It does get in the way, and I will tell you two stories about that. The first one was that when we started, we were working with a very well-known company, and they hired over 50 of our graduates over the years. And at the same time, while they were hiring our graduates, and we were sending them resumes for free, so there was nothing for them to worry in terms of costs or anything, they brought like 100 people from Brazil, right? Through a recruitment company that they were helping them to get talent from all over the world. So they brought 100 people. I believe that now, after 5 years, 99 of them or 100 of them left the company. Many of them went back to Brazil because they arrived. They didn't know what to expect from the prairies, from the cold weather in Canada, from everything. It wasn't like going to Silicon Valley. So they were expecting something else. They arrived here and it wasn't as they expected. So most of them left the company. So they paid lots of money to bring in people, and most of them, if not all of them, left. Many of the 50 people that hired from our program who were already here in Canada because they were born here or because they came through a provincial nominee program or whatever, but they did their research. They've been living and working here in Canada for a while, are still there. I know people who grew within the company, became managers, became leaders, and they are still working there because they were already part of our society where we weren't bringing people, as you mentioned, with all the issues that happen with the immigration, that they need to adapt, their families need to adapt. It's complex. It's not that it can't be done. It's just that it's complex and we are overlooking the talent that we already have here, PhDs, master's degrees, people without degrees who are learning by themselves and are super smart. We are not giving them the chance. That is one story. Yeah, and the other story has to do that I've been working with indigenous communities since early 21, actually 2020. And the thing that I've been seeing is there is this very well-known company who's been talking about all the barriers that indigenous communities face when joining the digital world. Most of them talk about the, the connectivity issues which exist in Canada. However, I'm still surprised that nobody talks about other issues. For example, we ran a survey with many indigenous students that went through our programs and other people that we work with. And actually, connectivity issues was the fifth issue that they mentioned, why they are not joining a digital career. The first one was the lack of remote opportunities. They don't want to leave their communities. Why would you? If I'm living in an
Yeah.
awesome place, why would I leave my family? And nobody's
Yeah.
talking about that.
Yeah. Again, we try to meet them on our terms. And I think the other thing that we find, and we talked about this earlier when we first met, when I entered the office world, I was a musician who got into IT. I had no idea. I had no idea what a tie was. I had no desire to fit in an office environment. And I got a lot of breaks, and a lot of people coached me on here's the things you have to do. Here's what you have to, and spent a lot of time with me. I don't get the sense that when we bring in indigenous people or we bring in other people, that we spend the same amount of time and effort helping them adapt to this strange new world. We treat it like you should understand this immediately. And I didn't, for heaven's sakes. I don't know
Yeah.
how anybody else does. But again, I got better chances. And part of that comes from you, white male. And I'm sorry, but that's
Yeah.
part of it. You get breaks. And I'm not saying that the people or that other people don't are prejudiced or anything like that. I'm just saying I got more breaks than I think we give to a lot of other people in bringing them along.
Yeah. I grew up surrounded by people who knew everything, right? In my family, at school, and or at least they think that they know everything, right? And the thing is, how many of us actually take those extra seconds to listen, right? To listen and to be flexible. And I learned across the years that's key to success in almost everything, in raising your kids, in including other people, in hiring talent, right? If you take those extra seconds to actually listen to an answer, listen to the issues that they are telling you they have. If you have someone living in a remote area and they tell you, you know what, yeah, I have connectivity issues, but if there is a job that it's not time critical, meaning that I'm working for a client, I'm developing their website, and as long as I have connectivity 1 hour per day that I can submit my work and somebody can review it, then I can do the job because I have no distractions. I live in a remote area. I can do an amazing job. I can learn, I can improve. So why don't we give them a chance? Why don't we give this person a chance to show what they can do? Instead of that, it's no, I want you to be sitting next to me because, well, I like to control stuff that way. Then I want you to
Yeah.
do stuff my way.
So we talked about some of the barriers, and I promised we wouldn't just admire the problem, but I think it's fair to set them down. One is if you're an immigrant, cultural issues and all kinds of issues of adapting. If you're from Canada, there may equally be different issues. We talked about the barriers, the certification barriers and the costs. Canada's way better than the US, but I've still seen people graduate from universities owing $50,000. And
Mhm.
I can't understand it. But even if you just take the certification levels it may seem like not a lot of money, $200, $500, $1,000 for all these certifications. And people with a list of certifications beside their name, you realize they spent ten or $15,000, which might be more money in the world than some people could even conceive of. So we've got those barriers. What have you done to break those down and how successful have you been at doing that?
Over the years, I've had many people telling me, you know what, the only way in which people won't drop out from your programs, because we always have people who decide that tech is not for them, that they don't want to invest the effort and the time. So people tell me you should charge something to people.
Mhm.
And my answer is always the same. It's like, how much is too much or too little? Because you can tell me at least charge them $10, for some families, $10, that's the whole food for the day. So if you charge them $20 or $500, because yeah, $500 is less than 10,000 or $15,000 that some certifications are worth. But when you start charging something, then there are people who are really in need who are left out. So my goal has always been, as I said, to try to listen to those in need and try to remove those barriers. That means that I have to assume that we'll have losses, meaning people who will drop out. Some companies, some others, they are not willing to accept that you may lose some people along the way. I'm okay with that. As long as my focus has always been if you can help two people to land a job, those two people, the impact that they will have in their families, in their communities, it's huge. The ripple effect is huge. And we are losing sight of that. Right? If you have a kid who just finished high school with a lot of effort and they are able to land a job in a remote community, they are able to provide for their family in a good way, then maybe their neighbors will find out about that as well. And maybe they will decide to follow that path. And then their whole community will be impacted, not only because of earning more money, but also understanding that there are different career paths, different alternatives, that there is hope. And that is what many of us lose sight of that. Like we think, let's just, if we don't impact a million people with a YouTube video or whatever, it's not worth it. My personal way of doing things has been to let's try to help one, five, 10. That's good. You know what? Over the years, I helped over 5,000 people to land jobs. So you start by one or two, and then you get to the thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is different about your program? What do you do differently, or what? And there may be other programs. By the way, this was not the part of this interview was not to say, "Oh, you're doing it right, and everybody else is doing it wrong." But I
No,
know you've had success, and I just wanted to share in that. What is different about your program?
there are two key aspects. Again, one is listening to the people and then acting on that, and then also listening to the labor market. That tech is evolving every day, is changing all the time. The technologies that were used 40 years ago, some of them are still being used, but some of them are not. And things change all the time. Now we are moving into a world with AI and machine learning and all those kind of things. So everything is changing all the time. And so my goal hasn't been to train people in tech for free. It's not like that. My goal has always been to try to help people overcome employment barriers by increasing their chances of being hired. So every time that I talk to people, they are like, okay, so you're going to get me a job. And I'm like, no, you're going to get a job. You're going to find your job. I'm going to help you get there by increasing your chances. That requires flexibility, meaning that we have to change the contents all the time. We have to change the courses that we teach all the time, because if you see on Indeed or Google Jobs that there is a trend on hiring Node.js developers, then we are going to run a course in Node.js, but in 3 months, maybe it might be .NET or Java or DevOps or cybersecurity. So you have to check and you have to listen to the labor market and you have to do what they are asking for. And that's how you increase the probabilities of people getting hired. If I train you now today, Jim, in something that I see 5,000 openings on Indeed, then you will probably have better chances than if I train you in something that there are 3 openings on Indeed.
Yeah, and also I think the other piece of this is training people appropriately for entry level.
Yep.
I and I've seen this. This is very real. A CEO friend of mine gave me something he got from HR for an entry level position, 5 years experience in cybersecurity. And I went, we laughed because we'd have to cry. He says, I got to go back and argue with HR now about this. And he had a fight on his hands. to be able to say, I want ability, not necessarily experience. And so I think those are big things. Are there other things that you do in your program differently, or that you think you do differently than other programs?
We've seen several of the things that we do being done by others, paid boot camps or colleges or universities. I know that there are co-op programs, there are job offices in many colleges or universities, and we try to do the same, right? We dedicate a lot of time to networking with companies. We try to connect with hundreds of companies every couple of months. We grab a bunch of contacts, hundreds of contacts from all over the country, because today there is a company in Ontario who is hiring, but maybe in 2 months that company won't be hiring. So you need to contact another company in BC or another one in Manitoba or another one in Nova Scotia. Networking all across the country gives you the chance to find out about the job openings that there are out there, that many times entry level jobs are not even. We've been talking with lots of recruiters and they tell us, I don't post anything on entry level because then I will get 1,000 applications from all over the world. And it takes me days and days to go through all that. So many times I get all the entry level people through referrals. So we want to be that referral, right?
Interesting.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I've seen that myself. We've advertised for jobs, and you get 1,000 unqualified people. I, that it is a problem, and I understand it when people are trying to hire for an entry level job. And so you're saying that people are doing this more on referrals. So that's another aspect that these programs have to have, is connection with employers to be able to provide those referrals.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's crazy that when you are an outsider, whether again you live in a remote area or you come from abroad, is that everyone talks about volunteering or everyone talks about Canadian experience and everyone talks about getting an education and getting a Canadian certificate. But not a lot of people tells you, hey, go to these meetups, do networking, try to connect with people over LinkedIn, try to grab a coffee with people, ask them questions, try to connect and understand the new environment that you are living in. Because I always tell the students that, for example, in our courses, we bring in volunteers, recruiters, technical people to just talk with the students for an hour and a
Mm.
half. And I tell people, ask questions, anything and everything. Don't be scared. Even ask them, hey, I have this resume. Why is nobody calling me? Can you just dedicate 5 minutes to review my resume and tell me why nobody's calling me? And by doing that, whenever this person finds out that there is a job opening, they will say, oh, I remember that I talked to this person and this person asked like really good questions.
But you've taken that to a new level. You're saying you're reaching out to all kinds of employers and trying to keep in touch with them. And what has that brought you?
In a personal way, you mean?
Oh, for personal, from the point of view of your program, what has that outreach done?
The outreach, of course, helps with finding out about the job openings and finding out about opportunities. And I always say that I feel a little bit selfish sometimes doing what I do because I actually enjoy it and I enjoy helping others. And I know that it's crazy. And I had conversations with friends and family about this because that you do what you love and then you end up feeling selfish for helping others because then it's okay. At one point, I'm feeling good about this. But connecting with lots of people also provides me with lots of information. I'm a person who loves understanding trends, data, right? Understanding what's going on. And with that, trying to understand why things are done. As I said, it's not about just talking about the problem, about companies not hiring local talent or developing local talent. It's trying to understand why it's happening. And that comes from this outreach, from having all these conversations and understanding. At one point, one of the things that I understood was that companies want to reduce risk, like many people in life, right? And when you are hiring someone who comes from abroad and absolutely nothing, about that person, then it's a risk.
Hmm.
You never know how this person will react, if it will be the right, as they or like quotation marks, like cultural fit, all those kind of things. It's a risk when you have absolutely no information about somebody who comes from abroad. One of the things that we did based on that is that whenever we are sending a resume to our company, we try to include, for example, a paragraph with information on how this person did during the course, during their interactions with us, so that we can kind of provide that reference if the person attended classes regularly, if they ask questions, if they helped others. So trying to reduce the risk. And that comes from having the information from our network, understanding what the pain points are for them. And again, that comes from listening.
Yeah. I so many questions I want to ask you about this, but one of them is, how do you recruit people? We've talked about how your relationship with employers. How do you find people, and how do you know they're going to be right for your program?
We This is funny because when you start working in any industry, whether it's nonprofit, education, tech, and any other thing, people tend to think that you are competing, right? Because there are limited resources in this world. And then you go to a nonprofit and they say, oh, you want to apply to the same grant that I want to apply to. Or you go and try to work with a recruitment firm and oh, you're giving them resumes for free and we charge for them. And my personal view has been complete, the opposite. I think that we should work with others. So how we recruit, we network as well with lots and lots of organizations, immigrant organizations, indigenous organizations. We send our courses to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, to Saskatoon Tribal Council, to friendship centers across BC. And we tell them, you know what, even if you want to just share these courses with your logo on it and say that it's something that you are doing with us and everything, I'm okay with that. Just provide this opportunity, share this opportunity with your community as something that your community is lucky to be able to provide, or that your organization is lucky to be able to provide to your community. So it is important to find ways to work with others, because the world doesn't work anymore on, I'm going to just run an ad on TV, or I'm going to just run an ad or radio, or I don't know, or
Social media, yeah.
you have to get to the people and you have to understand what they are consuming.
And so, what has this been like? You started out from ground zero. What are the numbers right now? How many people graduate from your program? What's your success numbers?
We're taking in over 500 to 600 people per year. So when it started here in Canada, the first courses in 2017, we trained 25 people.
Yeah.
So in 6 years, we grew to 500 to 600, depending on the year. Last year, it was close to 700 people. This year, it's 550, something like that, because we also try to run the courses based on the demands from the labor market. So another thing that we learned is that you can't train a million people. You can't, but not because there's no way of training a million people. There is. There's always a way of training a massive amount of people. But as I've been telling some other education providers, is that, let's say that you run a cybersecurity course online and you train 100,000 people in that course, but there are only 10 positions, 10 openings. You get the numbers of how many frustrated people you will get, right? You will have 900,000, 90, oh, whatever. I won't do the
Yeah.
math.
Yeah.
Nine,
You can
nine,
test
nine,
not
nine,
math. It's okay.
nine,
Yeah.
nine,
Yeah.
nine, 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 zero amount of people. So lots of frustrated people who went there to get an education because of a promise of a
Yeah.
dreamland, and they are not getting there. So you have to decide how many people you're going to be training every year. And it's been a wonderful ride. Again, like only in Canada, we helped over 1,200 people so far in the last 3, 4 years to get jobs. And to be honest, I think that we can do a lot more.
Wow.
But in order to do a lot more, we have to get more companies on board, meaning that all those companies need to understand that there is talent here that they can hire right now.
Yeah. And how do you get funded?
We've been very lucky in that aspect. I always tell people that I'm really terrible at finding funding. Since the day that we started back in South America, I told you, I worked for free and on my own dime for 4 or 5 years. And then one day, this Google guy called me on my phone. So it wasn't like I was looking for funding. It was more like I was doing something that was useful for society, that it made sense. And then funding appeared. And here in Canada, it was similar. We are lucky to have Google supporting us, and they've been supporting us for a few years now. We've been receiving funding from the federal government through their economic development side. So it's not like a nonprofit side, like getting grants for nonprofits from the federal government. It was more like, okay, so you're actually working on developing the ecosystem. So it makes sense that we will fund you through economic development.
Yeah. I'm surprised at that. And this is my big criticism of the federal government programs. The federal government programs are designed to give big money to big organizations.
Yep.
And an organization like yours, I'm glad you got the money. There are so many barriers to actually a single or small organization, which you've proven can do very effective work and probably a lot cheaper. Perhaps I'm not
Yep.
critical of all big organizations, but there are a lot of grant writing organizations up there, and their prime skill is writing grants. And that frustrates the heck out of me.
Yes, I have the same point of view as you mentioned, and it's something that at one point bothers us because we read on the newspaper that this organization gets $200 million, another organization gets $40 million, and what we get is nowhere near there, nowhere near the 1% of what they are getting. But I try not to focus on that. I try not to complain. I try to do our job, and I want to believe that one day we will get enough resources to help as many people as we can.
My point is, and like I said, I've never shied away from being opinionated on this program. The government that wants to encourage diversity should figure out how to be diverse in how they go out and fund. You can get $1 million from the federal government, and they'll spend $1 million of your money on a weekend program, bring in all kinds of stars and say they've done
Yep.
something for AI. But can
Yep.
you get them to actually invest $100,000 in a program that really helps Indigenous youth? Not so easy.
Yes, because unfortunately, again, I think that there is a lot of lobby, all the issues that exist in the federal government, in provincial governments. I try to work with some provincial governments a few times. I won't say which province again, but I had a conversation with an employment director, and I was sad. I don't know how to say it, but it was a really bad conversation. When a director of employment of a province tells you, why don't people just go to university? Why would they go to your program? Because they need a job tomorrow, not in 4 years. So I can't
Yeah.
believe that you're even asking me that.
Yeah. Let's not leave our audience bummed out on this. What's your hope? What's your plan for the next couple of years?
My hope is, as I always say, that we are pushing a very big rock here, all of us. You in your program, all of us who try to express our opinion and try to say things that they are, is that we are pushing a very big rock, trying to move it 1 centimeter a day. And so that my hope is that all these issues with diversity, with inclusion, eventually more people will understand that we need to do things differently, that we can't continue to grow in this world to have more businesses, more opportunities and everything by leaving people outside. So if we can change mindsets, I've always been telling people that teaching tech is easy. Changing mindset, it's super difficult. All right.
I think we'll leave him on that. I had the pleasure of interviewing Senator Colin Deacon, who is, I think, one of the bright lights in the Senate. And he said, you can't build a digital economy with analog thinking. And so the challenge I would leave for everybody, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this program, and I hope I've offended somebody in this because we haven't done the job, because we're still trying to do diversity with not diverse thinking. I'll just leave it at that. My guest today has been Pablo Listengard from ComIT, and me adding far too much commentary. So thank you, Pablo, for sharing your time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Wish you great success, and I hope for many more programs like yours. And like I said, I've been critical of the big programs. There are lots of other programs happening out there. We've had some of them on the show, and they should be encouraged as well. I don't want to make this sort of a thing where you're perfect, everybody's not. And that wasn't the intent, but it was to show that there's a different approach and a different way of thinking in this. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. And thank you to the audience for sharing your weekend with us. Hashtag Trending goes to air 5 days a week with a daily news podcast and a weekend interview show we call the Weekend Edition. If you're listening or watching, this is it. You can get us anywhere you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever. And we have a video version of this show, experimental now on YouTube and on our Tech News Day channel on YouTube. And you can find show notes and links to all of the things, and there will be a link to Pablo's program on our show notes. You can find those at technewsday.ca, and that I also post daily tech news stories there. I'm your host, Jim Love. I'll be off on Monday for Memorial Day, but back again in the news seat on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.